Good afternoon and welcome to the second day of our Passionist Institute. And this first session we're looking at community and connecting. It's been suggested that the secret to community is the love of difference. Of course, many people see difference as a threat, and in this era of social media, a lot of difference is not tolerated. But in fact, differences are what enrich a family or a community. Different gifts and personalities assist communities to appreciate goodness in a variety of ways and to see there's many different ways to achieve certain things. In our personal relationships and even in chemistry, it's known that opposites attract. Many people comment married couples might be an example. One's an introvert, one's an extrovert. And some psychologists have suggested that what attracts us to another person might be unfulfilled or underdeveloped needs we have or gifts we have that we recognise, sometimes subconsciously, in other people. So perhaps there's something about a gift that someone has that I realise I don't have, and by my association with them, it grows in me and completes me more as a person. So despite our differences, of course, we all have much more in common with each other than our differences. So we do well to focus on the positives and appreciate our differences will enrich us, especially in a community. We find our differences are a gift in Passionist life as we face the challenges of being part of a community in an era of ongoing change, or as Pope Francis calls it, a change of era. And that benefit applies equally to our Passionist companions. Of course, dealing with difference doesn't mean it's always easy. Like many things, the reward is greater for the hard work that's done to get there. Our chapter in July this year made some calls, especially about community, and I think it's helpful for us to stop for a moment and reflect on the effects of exponential change over the past 25 years or so, and the effects that change has had on community life. In 2020, the Harvard Business Review made the comment that much as we might like to think of COVID as an anomaly, it may not be. Conditions for accelerating change have been building for years, and there have been a lot of scientific studies to show how change has been accelerating, and we've all lived through that. They went on to say that advancements in information technology, automation, human interconnectivity, artificial intelligence have created a new reality where change is much more rapid, continual, and ubiquitous. So change, as we know, is just ever present in every field of life. They claim that COVID-19 and its derivatives have laid bare a new normal of change, exactly the parallel to the phrase of Pope Francis that it's a change of era. And as a reflection of that, our province at the present time has a higher percentage of older members than at any time previously in our history. In the 101 years that we've been a province, 147 men have died, and only 29 of them lived to be older than 82. Whereas at the present time, there are 33 Australian and New Zealand members, and 9 of them are older now than 82. So a much higher proportion, and living at the same time as each other. There's only one Papua New Guinean member older than 50, and no Vietnamese has reached that milestone yet. We also reflect the reality of what Western countries are experiencing, that generally of those who live to be 60 years of age, 2/3 will live past 85. So 85 is not the definition of being old. There are many people who feel aged much sooner than that. So the reality is we've got more community members experiencing the physical, mental and social changes that come with ageing, including more medical appointments, loneliness, the loss of peers, passionate brothers that they've known all their lives, and social isolation. Social disengagement is common amongst older people in the general community. So why would that be any different? That involves a gradual turning inward and a withdrawing both psychologically and socially from those around us. Older people slow down and late nights are not as common for them as they once were, with a few exceptions. And that can mean opposite preferred times for gathering for younger and older community members. Community involvement generally in society is recognised as something that provides a sense of belonging and social connectedness. Healthy connections with family, with friends, with co-workers and community members are known to lower levels of anxiety and depression and raise self-esteem. So healthy community living is good for our mental health. Well, probably just as true to say unhealthy community life would not be good for our mental health. We're seeking from our chapter to enrich our communities by ensuring that they're multicultural and that we learn what's required to live that effectively. And all of our Australian communities are already multicultural. We've got young and old members also living in the same community. Our older members are Australian or New Zealanders, whereas our younger members mostly are African, Indian, Papua New Guinean, Vietnamese, and as we've had at various times from PASPAC, men studying English, we have 2 Indonesian men living in our communities at the moment. In Australia, 25 of the 44 community members were born overseas. Port Moresby is a multicultural community. They have an Australian and a New Zealander as well as their local men. And New Guinea is, as well known, a land of many, many cultures, 800 cultures and languages. Vietnam too has many subcultures. So we have men from those cultures living together, but mostly they are of a similar age. So they're of the one major culture, Vietnamese, and mostly within an age range of mid-20s to mid-30s. So there's a quite difference in the multicultural makeup in Vietnam just by circumstances. However, most of the Vietnamese men have spent time in Australia learning English, and many of them also engaging in the novitiate, but not all of them, because the novitiate is now in Vietnam and some have not needed to come to Australia to learn English. So those who have experienced living in another culture and living in a community with people from different cultures. The world we live in, of course, is multicultural, and with mass migration occurring throughout the world, that's going to increase. We have to keep learning about one another, learning about our history, our culture, our view of the world, how we relate, our customs, and consider also how our cultures can embrace the gospel, because there is, by its very nature, a clash sometimes between what Jesus promoted and Christians try to follow and the secular culture we are living in. It's true too that everyone has an accent. We sometimes can forget that if we're the host culture. And those people who have a lower level of English or have a strong accent will sometimes feel embarrassment or fear about mixing or dialoguing with others because they know they've experienced not being understood. In the same way, others may not ask someone to repeat themselves out of fear of embarrassment because they haven't quite understood properly what was said. If we don't understand each other's greetings, idiom, and common sayings, we can feel like outsiders. We have to do what we can to welcome and make each other feel at home, including our food preferences. We can learn a lot if we respect the cuisines that we engage and taste. Not everyone, of course, is enamoured with Vegemite, but by sharing our food tastes and styles, we can start to move more closely towards effective multicultural living. Many people today feel they've got less time to get together with others and to stay in personal contact. We find this even amongst elderly people in society. They're so busy. And this has been exaggerated by the experience of COVID. Some people who were in regular contact have withdrawn. So that's likely to be paralleled in our own communities. How does it affect our community relationships? As a province, we certainly have nothing like the contact with each other that we used to have through our province assemblies, through gathering at funerals and such occasions. So how does the connecting affect our community relationships? How does it affect the need we have to belong that each member has, whether they're old or young, whether they're professed or companions? Building and developing relationships takes time and it takes presence. We have to be there with each other, spend time together, time to listen, time to share our stories, our memories, our hopes. In earlier times, our communities had structured times of recreation, particularly following meals. There was, in those days, no media intrusion, so recreation was often sharing stories or playing games together. But that's different now. Mostly it's been replaced by television, both in private homes and in our communities. The available programs on television monitors are mostly of limited interest to men from different cultures. We don't have the same sporting interests. If we don't understand the language and humour of a culture, the movies won't be so appealing. So we have to recognise that and learn healthy ways to deal with the fact that watching something in common is not likely to happen. Some younger men have not developed either the culture of gathering before or after a meal. And evening ministry limits opportunities for this, for maybe the same people regularly not able to be present when the community might gather. So many people are connected with others, but maybe not so much the people right around them immediately. Instead of watching something of common interest together, Some people watch programs of personal interest on an individual device. They might be watching the news from another country. The structured times of getting together to celebrate special events seems to me to be critical for healthy community life if these other factors are at play. Otherwise, there'll be few common gathering times. In a similar way, many companion gatherings since 2020 were, or still are, replaced by Zoom meetings, which maintains connections, but it doesn't have the same relationship building effect as face-to-face gatherings. Our lives have been radically changed by social media and technology. Face-to-face communication is being replaced by digital communication with faraway family and friends. And this is wonderful for people to stay connected with their families who live overseas. But often it's at the cost of the face-to-face relationships in our own home. Facebook claims that the average user has 155 friends. So how can genuine friendship and a sense of family be sustained with so many friends? Where do you find the time to connect personally with 155 people? So we're connected, but how effective is that? Or how are we connected? The book of Proverbs, written 3,000 years ago, suggests that friends come and go, but a true friend sticks by you like family. So they're rare, as we know, true friends. So there might be people that we're in contact with, but the level of our communication is quite low in terms of personal depth. Many, not necessarily young, but most of the younger members of a province would be using WhatsApp or other platforms to share regular communication with family and friends. These are new and effective ways of building community and connections for people today to stay connected, but again, often at the cost of personal contact. Making connections is not necessarily the same as creating or strengthening a community. Again, it might be about information versus relationships. How many people can any of us, be connected with? Technology assists in the drive to gather information at the cost or instead of developing relationships with people. Many people rejoice that they can be connected regularly with people on the other side of the world. But American Vanity Fair writer Nick Bilton asked a simple question: are we meant to be that kind of global community? We rejoice in the possibility, and when the connections happen, we rejoice, obviously. But are we meant to be living global community? All of this change has been very quick. It's only since 1995 that the internet has become publicly available, and email 2 years later. Google, 1998, Facebook, 2004, and the iPhone, 2007. These and many resources similar to them have enhanced us in gaining access to immediate information that once would have taken years to gather, and much of it we could never have known. Google responds, it says, to 8.5 billion searches every day. So lots of people wanting to know information. Incredible amounts of private and public information are shared instantly, often accompanied by images or videos, which once was impossible. And virtually everyone we know is benefiting from this. People overseas with grandchildren can send a video. Friends can share information, talk to their relatives where once it was too expensive or impossible. In terms of living healthy community lives, not everything about that is so positive. I think it helps us if we reflect on how technology is changing our forms of communication and therefore our ways of living community. Dr. Dieter Zetsky was the managing director of Mercedes-Benz in 2017, and he said that year that Google, Apple and Amazon were greater threats to Mercedes than other car companies were. So in competing for sales of cars, he wasn't as worried about other cars competing with Mercedes as he was about software, because he predicted that software was going to disrupt many traditional industries. And two examples he gave were that Uber doesn't own any cars, but it's the biggest taxi company in the world, and Airbnb is the biggest hotel company in the world, but it doesn't own any properties. So there was a big shift taking place. And he predicted that there would be 90% less lawyers in the future. And he drew on information at the time, like IBM Watson was able to diagnose cancer more accurately than most doctors. Facebook recognition was superior to most humans' ability. And computers and robots were increasingly evident in new industries. One of the recent examples of that gathering pace is robots serving as waiters in restaurants. And Alexa and Siri and other voice assistants can answer thousands of questions that we ask and actually engage in tasks. They can be asked to turn the blinds down at night time or to give us the weather forecast for the day. In this year, we've become much more aware of Dr. Zetsky's predictions about AI and that they're proving true. I mean, who had heard of iChat TV a year ago? And if you haven't had someone demonstrate very simply some of the capabilities of iChat TV, it's astounding. So with all of this, we can be missing what's right in front of us. We've all seen passengers on public transport engage with their devices rather than engage with the people that are with them or around them. We've seen patrons dining at a table in a restaurant, each of them connected with someone who's not at the table, maybe a family, 4 or 5 people, and each of them has a phone out and they're sending messages or looking at information and not engaged in conversation with the very people right there in front of them. So what's become of human contact? How much of it is being sacrificed for this information gathering and connecting with people who are distant from us? It's a matter of, I'm here, but you're not, or you're here and I'm not. We might be, for example, waiting for Google to verify a comment during a conversation rather than listening to the person sharing with us. Maybe they say something and we think, I can argue with that by proving from Google that what they just said is not correct. But is that important rather than listening to the story and engaging in the conversation? Are we willing and are we able to really listen to one another in this age? Or are facts the dominant feature? Are we prepared to swap personal touch and sight for remote contact and photographs? Is that a risk for our community life? Connected, but personally distant. After all, community is about relationships. It's a matter of the heart. If the secret to true community is the love of difference, then social media risks us losing that gift as People become more intolerant of people who disagree with them, and where ideas matter more than hearts. Every human is unique, but we each have a heart that wants to love and a spirit that seeks to be appreciated and accepted. Looking into another person's face tells us infinitely more than looking into their Facebook profile. So we've got all the benefits from social media and technology, but we have to watch that we don't lose some of the more critical values. Community life and companions fellowship allow people to belong, to be accepted, to contribute, to love and to be loved. We tolerate each other and we celebrate our differences because we're not afraid to see other people develop. We're not afraid to see people respond to opportunities that come their way. And in a healthy community, other people's success is a gift for us as much as it is for them. Jesus says where 2 or 3 gathered, he's there with them. And Jesus calls us into community. It's there that we live and where we celebrate true faith. So we need to keep searching for the best ways to make community happen so that we can recognise the kingdom of God is amongst us. So hopefully our own experience is profound so that we can share that experience with others. Because that's why we're living community life, to proclaim the message of God's love, to create community not just for ourselves but for others. It's our vocational commitment. We have, as a result of our chapter and what's come from it, an opportunity to review our community life. So I think we could profit from some genuine conversations about the challenge to our community life as professed or as companions that result from these times we live in and some of the effects we've been talking about. The multicultural communities we want to create, what will they look like, what's needed, and the vision that Paul of the Cross had for us to live. Remembering especially that for him, community is the bedrock of our life and mission. So it's how we live, but it's also the message that we both preach and share in our mission, our ministry. As we know that Paul did not have any one single ministry that was descriptive of Passionist. Rather, he had a message that he believed was our charism to preach and to share, to proclaim the message of God's love, especially to the religiously illiterate, the poor who didn't know of God's love. So he said, exhaust every means possible to do that. Find any way you can to proclaim the message of God's love. Being a matter of the heart, it's likely that's far more effective in a face-to-face relationship. The message first has to be reflected on, prayed about, and studied in our communities. We can't preach what we don't experience, otherwise it's false. Our rule says that the demands of the apostolate must be harmonised with the requirements of community life, and no long-term commitments are to be undertaken without consent from the provincial or the community. So our apostolate and our community, we are living apostolic community life. Many of our men, both young and old, have experienced patriarchal leadership in their family, in their culture perhaps, and many have experienced various levels of trauma in their family of origin. And that affects the expectations they bring to community life and their capacity sometimes to contribute to it. Affirmation, encouragement, compassion and forgiveness may not have been their predominant experience in their family home, and yet they seek to live by these values and they seek to teach and preach them. If in a community we don't have each other affirming, encouraging and forgiving each other, we're going to suffer a great deal from the capacity not being reached. Perhaps to just also say that a community, just like a plant doesn't grow without water, each of us needs these gifts, and the more we can contribute them to others, the more we can allow those people who are deprived of those experiences to experience them and then to duplicate them for others and to contribute to the understanding of that when they preach and teach others. I think it's also critical that this is modelled by all of our community members and especially our community leaders, that they're men of compassion, forgiveness, affirmation and encouragement. We also need to consider how the movement throughout the church for synodal practice can become central to dialogue and decision-making in our communities. To achieve this, it's essential that we focus on active listening and respect for each other's views. That's going to be critical in our multicultural communities. So there's some questions we would like now for you to share. If you're watching this personally, you can perhaps reflect on some of these questions. If you're gathered with a small group or going into a chat room, you could share with one another your response to these questions. Thank you.